All right, everybody, it is the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the North Central Climate Collaborative's October webinar. By way of logistics, wanted to let you know that we are currently recording this meeting, and we'll continue to do so until the end of the hour. We also will have a poll that will pop up after the presentation and encourage you to fill that out at the point in time where that exists. The restrooms and snacks are where you last left them. This is an extension meeting, but it's a virtual one. And you currently do not have the ability to mute yourself. So please, throughout the presentation, do put any questions you might have into the chat box, and we will get to those in the order they're received at the end of the presentation. With that said, I think I've covered everything, and I want to hand it off to Aaron Wilson with The Ohio State University to introduce our speaker for today.
Yeah, thank you, Hans, and thank you to all of you who are joining us today. It certainly is my pleasure to introduce Marilyn Thelen as today's speaker. Marilyn retired from Michigan State University Extension in January of this year, 2023, after serving as the Associate Director for the MSU Extension Agriculture and Agribusiness Institute from 2018 to 2023. Marilyn first joined MSU Extension in 1984 and then returned in 2001 after gaining experience with the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development and as an MSU Research Associate. Marilyn says, in addition to being an MSU Extension educator focusing on cropping and livestock systems, she has served as the Clinton County Extension Director and interned as District Coordinator. Marilyn has a bachelor's and master's degree, both from Michigan State University. Marilyn also grew up on a farm in southern Michigan and has farmed with her husband, Lee, for nearly 36 years. They have 2 grown children who also work in the agriculture industry. In her retirement, Marilyn serves on the Greenstone Farm Credit Board of Directors and is playing a more active role in the farm. I'm going to let her kind of describe the tone of her talk today, but certainly something we are all a part of is adapting to change, and that is the theme of Marilyn's talk today. Welcome, Marilyn. You now have the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron. It's exciting to be back, and it's exciting to see all the names I recognize popping up. So that's fun. So I'm going to be talking about adapting to change, both in my career as well as our farming operation and through my career with Extension. So I think we all do this as we move through our career, but sometimes we don't realize that's going to be the direction we go. We don't know the direction we'll go. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about my career. Aaron gave you a little bit of an overview. I'm going to talk about climate, how I got involved in working with that through my career and what its impacts have been on our farm. And then talk a little bit, and this is going to be a more interactive portion, about the role of extension. And so I'll give you my thoughts, but I'm going to look for your thoughts as well. And this is my, this barn here is the barn that is on my home farm. So I just like the picture. So in my career, this is a messy slide, but it pretty much sums it up. So my career path, I started on a farm and growing up on a farm in St. Joseph County, Michigan. And I went to Michigan State University for my bachelor's and my master's degree in animal science. From there, I moved into Extension. Right after I finished my master's, I started with Extension in 1984 in Clinton County, which is where I still reside. I was there until 1988, working as a livestock agent. At that time, they were calling them agents. I left Extension, went with the Michigan Department of Agriculture and coordinated the county fair program. I did that for about 12 and a half years, and then I came back to Extension, again in Clinton County. There are several reasons that I did this, but the biggest one was I had a daughter and a son that were in elementary school that continually broke their arm when I was someplace else in the state. So I needed to be closer to home and stay a little closer to home. So I came back working in Clinton County, and it was a lot easier to manage my family at that point in time. I came back as a field crops educator. And that seems counter to what my education was in. But I also was farming about 1,400 acres with my husband at that point in time, mostly row crops. And it was a good opportunity for me to work close to home and to continue learning about production agriculture and the management practices that help people succeed. So I was with Extension in Clinton County for a number of years, hosted anything from the Great Lakes Manure Handling Expo in 2007 to working with a lot of the people that are part of the North Central region that are in Michigan, Paul Gross, Christina Carell, a lot of those on a lot of the soil health and so forth. In 2018, I took the position of Associate Institute Director with the Ag and Agribusiness Institute, and I worked in a management role for 5 years until I retired last January. Outside of work, I do have family. Farming has been a big part of that. I have a daughter and a son and a daughter-in-law. We enjoy hiking. When we get some time, I work more on the farm now than I did before. So there's me in front of my tractor this spring. But we're also good partners with agriculture. And so that one is one of our fields where we dug a nice big hole and talked about soil health, talked about macropores and how water moves through the soil and can move into the root zone or into the tile line, and talking about some of the risk and rewards of water moving through the soil. And so it's kind of parts and parcel of everything I do, it seems like. So my retirement was January of 2023, and that was a great time to celebrate all of the people that I've met. But you'll notice in my introduction of myself and my career that it was anything but linear. Farming is a constant theme in it throughout, but I went anywhere from animal science to field crops to climate to administration. Even administering county fairs, but those are very agricultural, right? But I think all of those things really helped me. And what I did to adapt was really lean on my practical experiences that I had, both growing up as well as everyday life. My education, even though it was very much animal science, it had a lot of pieces within it that were applicable to my career throughout. Some of it is, research and writing and being able to recognize credible information and how to share that. So all of that stuff added to my adaptation. Relationships were a big, big part of it. It didn't matter what career I was or which job I was in. Building those relationships was key to really being able to succeed. And ag is a small world, so it doesn't matter which entity you're working in within that. You're going to run into the same people. And so building those relationships, keeping strong relationships was really key. And expanding my view on ag. Had I just stayed in animal science focused things, I wouldn't have the umbrella view that I have, but they all play together. And really being able to expand that and starting to look closer at the climate piece that I did and starting in 2011 was really a big part of that expansion. And so I think that it's important to continue to learn, continue to keep your mind open to new things and new avenues of research and information that can impact your career, your farm, whatever it is. And then taking up advantage of leadership development opportunities as they came down the road. That also really helps you helps me, and not only in my career, but also as I worked with individuals. Whether I had moved into an administrative role or not, I believe all the leadership development pieces that I worked with really helped me to succeed. So climate. I really didn't start in the climate world or thinking very seriously about it until 2011. And that's when I became a member or the extension representative for Michigan for the corn cap. And with that, we were looking at some of the regional research that was there or was needed. We conducted farmer interviews in the local area to get farmer perceptions and made a lot of really great connections, which I'm thinking is kind of how I got myself on this webinar today. Took that information and we moved it into some of the Michigan things that we did to share the climate story and some of the research and so forth. And one of the things that was really, really impactful, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later, is some of the fish bowls we did. And they're really just a farmer or agribusiness discussion group, but they're in the middle discussing. And then the educators and researchers were around the outside of this perceived fish bowl listening. And that was a really, really good way to get an understanding of where they were on their journey with understanding climate and weather and its impact on their farm. And then expanding the research of climate in this region. That also connected with the North Central Region Climate Group, which I served on until I went into administration in 2018. Again, was an opportunity to continue the work in climate, connecting resources with some of the realities that we were seeing locally. And again, making those good relationships. And then in MSU Extension itself, all of these pieces added to the tools, programming, and demonstrations that we were able to provide locally in Michigan. So this is sort of the corn cap group that I joined at the time. And if you look really close, you'll find some people you may recognize that are in there from many moons ago. But this is sort of the region that it covered and worked with researchers across those areas, as well as closely to those in Michigan in the 2 locations that they had research sites, and then worked with producers on providing that information. This was one of the slides from the corn cap thing, and I put this in here because I think it's still very relevant. It's scientists and farmers working together to create a suite of practices for corn-based systems that are resilient in times of drought, reduce soil nutrient losses under saturated soil and flood conditions, reduce farm field nitrogen losses, retain carbon in the soil, and ensure crop and soil productivity. And in Michigan, we added phosphorus in there as well as nitrogen, because that's one of the nutrients that we're very concerned with keeping in the soil and out of the water. And I think that even though this was from 2011, it is still very relevant in some of the things that we're trying to do within Extension today, and in any of our groups is working to meet these objectives through science, outreach, and so forth. This also is one of the slides from back then, and it's talking about what the new normal will be. Volatility and irregularity in rainfall. Are we seeing that? Greater temperature differentials season to season and year to year. Did we have any concerns with growing degree days this year or any time in the last few years that were a bit out of normal? A decrease in overall regularity of weather patterns, and an increase in unpredictable conditions year to year. I think that is our current normal. At least on our farm, it seems like that is becoming our current normal. And I think that crystal ball was working relatively well back then. One of the things I mentioned that we did with the corn cap program right out of the gate is we did a farmer survey. And so we selected farmers from across the state and sent these surveys to them. And then we met the farms, or met on the farms, and talked to them about the survey, had made sure they filled it out, collected that and sent it in. And then we had a nice regional data set to figure out farmer perceptions. So one farm I got to, in southern Michigan, I walk onto the farm and the guy looks at me and he goes, well, this seems an awful lot like climate change to me. And I'm like, yep, it is talking about the changing weather patterns, and we just want your perception. So whatever your perception is, that's fine. I was pretty sure I knew what his perception was at that point in time. And it wasn't that different from all the rest of them. Remember, this is 2011, and climate change was a really bad word for some people. So I wasn't terribly surprised. He filled it out. He participated in the program. 2012 growing season. This is a July 24th drought monitor map. And you'll notice that there's drought in a lot of the United States. And though Michigan wasn't as bad as everybody else, the southern part of the state was severe drought. And we were seeing this drought that we hadn't seen in a really long time on a relatively large scale. So I go out and talk to these farmers again. And interestingly enough, one of them says in the spring of 13, well, maybe there is something to this climate change thing. And I think that as we talked about what we may expect with climate change and so forth, as people started seeing that in their management or in their farms and having to manage through those different changes, I think that helped them to see that climate change isn't a political buzzword. The changing climate does have an impact on my farm. And what can we do about it? The farmer discussion groups that I'd mentioned before, those fish bowls, they were a really good way to get sort of a temperature of what farmers were thinking as well. And so we gave a nice little overview of kind of the programming and climate, what am I trying to say? Climate predictions and some of the models and why we're seeing what we're seeing and so forth, what some of the trends were. I think that's what I was trying to say. And we did this in 3 different locations across Michigan, and Michigan's a really diverse state in terms of cropping systems. So we had some fruit crop producers, we had row crop producers, we had agribusiness. Trying to get an idea of kind of what is your perception of the changing climate, and what needs to be done, what resources can be provided. And then we had researchers and educators listening around the outside of this circle. Great discussions. But one of the things that came out of it from our field crop producers and the industry representatives, they agreed that the rate of change may be increasing. They were seeing things happening. Yet each year was different. So they were seeing that variability as well. And they really said, and this I think it was the important part for me as an educator, is successful production really depends on responsive management of current conditions. So pay attention to what's going on. Just because you want to plant corn and have it all in by X date in the spring probably isn't going to work. What's going to be best for this year, because it may be very different than what it was for last year. In fact, this year, we had all of our corn and beans in a really timely manner. We did great. They went in good conditions. And then we didn't get rain for 50 days. So, that I didn't have much control over because we don't irrigate. But those are the type of things that I think is going to be important for successful producers, is recognizing conditions and then adapting management to meet those conditions so you can be successful in that year. And that is living with the reality of a changing climate. So all of these pictures are from the last 6 to 8 years, 10 years. And we've had anything from really drought-ridden corn to flooded fields that you can't get in, to looking at disease pressure and things that we hadn't expected before. So how do we deal with that? Well, in 2019, we had a pretty significant spring extreme weather event. And its impact on Michigan was delayed planting or prevented planting for nearly all of our crops. The map on the, with all of the dots on it is basically the different crops that had prevented planting. And the one on the other side is prevented planted acres. And so you can see we had a lot of acres that didn't get anything in. That's a concern for agriculture, right? It's a concern for the producers. It's a concern whether you're growing the crops or if you're a producer that's going to be feeding those crops, and the availability or the price is not going to be very, very manageable for you. So as an extension person, we're looking at this saying, okay, what is the response we can provide to these producers to help them manage through this extreme event that they're dealing with in 2019. So MSU Extension put together a rapid response for ag. It was a multidisciplinary type work group that basically came together and looked at what are the conditions now that we're dealing with? What resources do we have within MSU, within other research, within whatever that we can put together and provide producers to make good decisions at this point in time. So it had to be very rapid. It had to be very timely. And so it started in when things were not getting planted and it went all the way through to the fall when you're trying to harvest crops that are maybe going to get frosted off and are going to be a lot wetter. How are you going to manage that wet corn? What are our options? This worked really well. We had individuals from our field crop team. We had individuals from our livestock team, all participating in the what ifs as this growing season rolled out. It generated some really timely articles. These articles were picked up by Agribusiness, by Ag Publications, which really helped us to expand our reach on it, as well as producers. So it was a really nice model to try to deal with these extreme events and how they impact management decisions on the farm, and do it in as close to real time as we could. We also look at, so if climate change is a bad word in some communities, and even if it's only a portion of your audience, you don't want to turn them off to the information you'd like to share. So one of the things that we made a conscious decision on was to look at talking about, what did we call it? That's bad. Whether, I don't know, anyway, a changing climate. It's something that wasn't quite climate change, so but talked about the impacts. And so one of the things that we did that I thought was really successful is how water moves through the soil. And it's basically a demonstration using soil from the region where we're teaching with cropping systems from the region where we're teaching, and talks about and actually demonstrates how extreme events, because my little sprinkler was an extreme event, impacts that soil when it's managed in that way. So it looks at runoff, infiltration. When I did it with manure, we could see nutrient movement with the manure, and looking at how it's impacting different cropping systems. This was a really good aha moment for a lot of people in the audience. And we didn't talk about climate change. We talked about extreme events, and we talked about cropping systems that they recognized, and we showed what the impacts were through this demonstration that may not have changed their mind at that moment, but really helped them to think about it and look at their systems in a different light when they were out there working. We did demonstrations where we dig right down into the soil and look at how do your different systems impact underground? What are we seeing in terms of organic matter, in terms of macropores? Do we have hard pan in there? And what caused that? And how can we get rid of it if we can get rid of it? What does that hard pan do to the ability for your roots to explore the soil and find moisture? And so those were all really good visuals that help producers recognize what they're doing and how it may impact their soil and its resiliency moving forward. but it didn't say the word climate change. It just talked about some of these things. So those are some of the things that I did throughout my career to try to do it. We certainly did more than that, but I couldn't share everything. On our farm, two of our top challenges in recent is really the variability, that season to season weather that is just not as predictable as it used to be. I had mentioned our 2023 cropping season and how challenging that was. In 2019, we didn't have any prevented planted acres. I would say part of that is because we have a long history of no-till or minimal till. So our soils are they drain better because they have a good system of macropores. We're also very persistent. We had some late planted stuff, but it ended up working out well for us. But that's one of the adaptations that we had used to get through the 2019 season. And I think it's helping on some of the other, but we can see that variability, and it is a challenge from year to year, as well as those extremes, both too much water as well as too little water. Right now we are planting wheat, which is later than you would like, but we're having a challenge getting soybeans off because it has just been wet this fall. It has been wet practically every other day or so since October 4th. So again, it's changing how we would ideally manage, but you still have to take a look and say, okay, can we do this, and are we going to do any damage if we do it this way, or can we be successful if we do it this way, given the situation we have? Some of the adaptations we put in place, we really minimize and work to minimize our soil disturbance. So we've, like I said, we've been minimum or no-till for over 40 years. We try to build the soil. We do cover crops, especially not on all of our acres, but especially on some of our sandier soils, to try to improve the organic matter in there. And our soil tests are showing that we're actually doing that. And I think that's helpful when you have extended periods with no rain. And then you've got to practice patience. Compaction's a really hard thing to fix. So we work very, very hard not to rut up our fields and so forth, as much as we possibly can, and still get the job done. So those are some of the things that we've done. So with extension, I think the role of extension is just increasingly more important as we look at a lot of these changes we're dealing with. This is another slide that I took from the slide deck from the Sustainable Corn Program. And I thought it just kind of laid things out as to kind of where we've been and where we're coming. So farmer stages of adaptation to climate change. Early stage adaptation includes earlier planting dates, selecting different varieties or hybrids, changing fertilization and irrigation scheduling. I think we've got farmers that are doing that. I think that's kind of a common practice at this point. In the moderate, extensive changes to crop genetics, including greater tolerance and to elevated temperature, drought, and so forth. And I think we're starting to see some of our hybrids and seeds that are being selected for that. And I know we have producers that are utilizing those. Also, those seeds that are going to be tolerant or resistant to some of the diseases that we're seeing an increase in as well. So I think we're moving to that moderate stage where we've got some adaptation. And then the severe stages is whole regions that will have transformative shifts and different agricultural systems entirely. So I think that we're moving through some of that. These are just my thoughts on the role of extension in working with this changing climate. Never stop learning and keep your mind open to new ways of doing things. And watching really what the trends are and what the data is showing in terms of what the impact of climate on our production systems. getting involved. I think getting involved in things like the Sustainable Corn Project was a great thing for me in terms of getting involved. It introduced me to researchers across the region with common ideas, and it introduced me to educators across the region that I could partner with throughout my career, and then partner. That we have larger regions that we're working with as educators in Michigan. And that has been a trend over the last probably 20 years, where we have less people in larger areas that we're covering. And one of the ways that I was able to do some of that was the ability to partner with people, so that I knew who other resources were that I could call on, and I didn't have to be the expert in everything. And I knew where some of those resources were that I could pull in, that other researchers were working on, that brought some of that new information to my producers. Share innovations, real examples that people are using. If they're working, share those with people. Demonstrations, like I had said with the rainfall simulator, demonstrate so that people can see what's actually happening. I think that Extension is great at doing that. So how can we really get people to have that aha moment on what's really happening in their area, on their farm, under their system? Be a resource. Set yourself up to be a resource so people will come to you for that information. Changing conditions require quick solutions. So when we're having different growing conditions, season to season, year to year, we have to be able to adapt and really move in a direction that allows us to be successful under the conditions we're given. So recognize that and embrace it. That's one of the challenges we have. Sort the grain from the chaff. Right now, there's a lot. Climate change isn't such a bad word anymore. Now there's grants out there, there's money out there, there's people out there, there's products out there, there's all sorts of stuff out there that's addressing some of these extreme events and climate change and how we're going to deal with it. Which ones are the good ones? Which ones are the ones that may or may not work? Extension's played a role in that for years, for forever, I think. Well, probably the first 13 years of my career, I did hybrid trials. Basically, you're looking at comparing the products that are available and helping make an informed decision on what's going to be work best under these conditions. And then keep the conversation going. You know, when in 2011, when I did the survey and people were a little reluctant to talk about climate change, we kept talking about the changing climate and its impact on agriculture. And 2-3 years later, they're like, there might be something to this. I'm seeing it on my farm. I've heard about it from my extension folks, and I think that it's something we're going to need to manage through. And I think that if you keep that conversation going, that people will continue to learn, both our clientele and the partners that we're working with. So I have just a couple of examples. I talked a little bit about the demonstrations. I still think that's just a great way, and really to do it with the systems that are acceptable, or as well, or accepted, or the traditional systems within that region, as well as the ones that you're looking to demonstrate as new ways of doing management. And I think that there are tools out there that allow us as educators to be able to do that. We had for many years, until COVID shut it down, a Michigan Ag Innovation Day, and we're really trying to bring innovations in technology to producers, to share what some of those new innovations are and show how that they can provide things. And I think I've talked almost too long, haven't I? This I put in here because it was a great partnership with industry and so forth. And then really, we have in Michigan a lot of new educators, and I think that there is just a tremendous opportunity to take advantage of learning and partnering and making connections throughout the region with existing educators, new educators, the whole works. Make sure you're providing those opportunities. So I'll open it up for you to share your thoughts on those, if I've given any time for that. And if I haven't, I apologize. So that's what I've got.
All right. Thank you, Marilyn. No, we're doing great on time, but really appreciate that comprehensive look at climate, you know, throughout your career, throughout your farming experiences, and then sharing a number of lessons that I think are really good for this audience to hear. So I just want to remind folks, I think we're all muted, and if you've got any questions, comments, things you want to share, Hans, I'm supposing that's in the chat, correct? As folks are thinking about that, I've got a couple of questions I think I can share, and Hans is also going to put up the poll here as well as we get started with some questions. I thought it was interesting. You talked about the kind of the in moment quick solutions in response moments, the 2019 rapid response. We had a very similar thing here in Ohio as well. And one of the things that I'm not sure I did a good job from a climate perspective in Ohio is kind of circling back to that and putting that rapid response in within the climate context and helping partners that were in that moment kind of learn and kind of learn the climate aspect of the whole climate context of that rapid response and kind of thinking about can we prepare for similar events in the future and learn what we're doing in those rapid response. Can you maybe speak to that a little bit? Was there any kind of follow-up to that in terms of putting it into climate context, or the lessons learned from that rapid response that can help us, right, as we continue to face these big challenges?
I don't know as we did a formal follow-up on it, but I think that some of the response, especially when we were dealing with some of the destruction of fields and so forth with ruts and so forth in really wet conditions, we were able to weave in there some of the soil health pieces, the reduced tillage, some of those things that are going to make that soil a little bit more resilient. So I think we were able to talk a little bit about that. So in addition to the immediate management, what do you do long-term to create a more resilient system? And some of that was woven into some of the materials that we produced.
Yeah, thanks. Just a reminder, you can continue to put any questions or comments that you have in the chat. I had another one. I really liked, how you stepped back to the CAP project and kind of thinking about those different tiers of change and thinking about the transformational shifts. I feel like, a lot of us are involved, and you had both the extension educator lens, the farmer lens, extension educator lens, and the administration lens. And so when you think about extension administration, what are, do you have any thoughts on, regionally, how that might look as we sort of, rally behind climate and impact and programming across the entire, North Central region and even the country when it comes to these transformational shifts within extension?
I think that for me, that falls in the category of where you are really looking at allowing your educators to get involved in the regional things, really encouraging that involvement so that they, for me, getting involved in the CAP project really opened my eyes to the climate trends and how they really were making an impact, as well as the resources that were available to me as an educator, both researchers at universities across the North Central region, that many of those things applied, some of them maybe didn't. Like I said, they didn't talk about phosphorus at all, and I was really interested in that here in Michigan. But other than that, a lot of that stuff was applicable across the states that were part of this. And so getting educators involved in those things, letting them make those connections, letting them see things outside of their actual region, outside of even their specific area of study, so that they know other things that are going to impact that bigger picture, I think for me is a really good opportunity. I think that gives them a larger depth of knowledge and a larger pool of resources to be able to continue to build their career.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you have thoughts about cross-state collaboration at the extension level also, and how things that are happening within our states, and obviously we've got groups and things that are doing some of this amplification and dissemination across state boundaries. But at the extension, like kind of leadership level, is there an appetite there to learning from our extension neighbors across the region at the administration level?
There's some of that goes on now. And I know that when I was an administrator, we had a North Central Region leadership group that met monthly. And so that was always a good way to just keep up on what was going on across the regions and what programs people were using. At one point in time, they did have a leadership program that they provided for educators, new educators, that was theme-based. And I don't know what the status of that is, but that's a good opportunity. And I know that one of the things that we were doing in Michigan was looking at even sharing some educators across states. We do have one of those in Michigan that has been successful over the long run. Lyndon Kelly, our irrigation guy, is half Purdue and half Michigan, because irrigation kind of crosses that line. And we were looking at doing some of that as well across Ohio, where we've got some similarities. And I retired, so I don't know what the status is, but
Chris Galbraith, he's now both Michigan State and Ohio State.
Okay, good.
Festivals across Northern Ohio. Yeah, so it's a good example. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we're doing some of that. And I do think there's some real advantages to doing that because you really expand your pool of research and resources. So other educators that you can pull into things, because you don't know what you don't know, right? So the more you can get involved and build those partnerships and make those connections, and any excuse to do that is going to really help you to build your portfolio of things that you can offer to your producers.
I've got a question. I once heard someone state that farmers remember their best year, their worst year, and last year. As a farmer yourself, more fully invested in the farm now that you've retired, do you believe that statement to be true?
Well, since I was always on the sidelines or working someplace off the farm, most of it, I don't know as I remember those, but I know my husband can quote dates on things like that right off the top of his head. So I'm going to go, yeah. And I haven't got to my last year yet.
Well, I knew you'd thrown out 2019 and, maps from 2012 and such. So it seems like maybe multiple worst years might be remembered.
Yes, I think so. And I think that there's several examples where the farmers just recently in this area have had them come closer together. Any other questions?
Yeah, any questions from the audience today?
We are a little smaller crowd this time, so I am going to go ahead and allow people to unmute themselves if you would like to ask a verbal question.
Marilyn, this is Landon Baumgartner. I'm over in across the lake in Wisconsin. I'm a conservation department employee with one of the counties over here. With this year being so dry, we all in the upper Midwest struggled with dry weather, particularly relating to cover crops. What has been your experience hearing from farmers in regards to their a position toward such conservation practices that maybe harmed them, especially earlier on in the season in regards to moisture?
I did hear from several farmers that the moisture was a problem, especially if they didn't get them killed soon enough. And that was a problem because we were actually kind of wet coming into growing season in Michigan, and early. and then it just plain shut off. So if you lost that early moisture, you were struggling. And so anybody that had cover crops that they didn't get killed off soon enough, they did have some moisture challenges. The cover crops that we plant on our farm all winter kill.
Any other questions? All right, well, I don't see any or hear any. So Marilyn, I just want to thank you for spending time with us today and giving us that great look back at your career and your farming, and wish you all the luck as we all, as you said, continue to adapt in the future. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciated the opportunity, and I'm glad I was still able to manage my technology and make it work.
Perfect. You did a
Didn't
great
come
job.
off looking too old, maybe.
No, thank you very much. And I'll turn it back to Hans. Thanks.
All right, stay tuned for our next webinar, which will be held in late November or early December. We do not have the date set yet because we are waiting for that meeting in Duluth to get over with, to free up our Minnesota cohort so that we can have a joint webinar with the Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership and the North Central Climate Collaborative to end the year. Thank you all for attending. Have a great rest of your day.